Hi, I'm Dave from boinaband.com, and welcome to my 7-day song tutorial on hip-hop, where I'll be taking you through the process of making a hip-hop song from scratch over, you guessed it, 7 days. At the end, I'll post the finished song, and you guys can post your completed songs as video responses and win some sweet prizes. Check the competition video for more info on that. I'll go through things like making the beat, hip-hop bass, sampling, scratching, some sweet synths, a bit about music theory, arrangement of a conventional hip-hop song, and mixing and mastering. This is the 5th 7-day song, so be sure to check out the other ones too. And also, I encourage you to post your tracks on the boinaband.com forum to share your music, make some friends, and learn more about production. In day 1, I'll be teaching you how to make a phat hip-hop beat, with techniques like using ReGroove to add swing, layering, EQing, and compression to build a bouncy, driving bassist to your track. Okay, let's begin. We'll start by setting the tempo to 95 BPM. Unlike the genres we've dealt with before in the 7-day songs, the BPM can vary massively for hip-hop, so feel free to go for something much faster or slower if that's what you want. Right-click and create an M-Class Mastering Suite combi, and under that, create a mixer 14:2. Let's minimize this so we don't get it in the way. And underneath it, let's create a combinator for our first loop, so let's call this drums with a Z, because we're hip-hop now. Okay. Now I'm going to right-click and create a line mixer 6:2, followed by a ReDrum drum computer instance. Now, I'll load up the sample pack I've created. If you're struggling for samples, head over to boinaband.com and search for the G-Funk sample pack, which contains some sweet kicks and claps. The samples I'll be using, though, are from the primeloops.com XXL hip-hop drums sample pack, which is freaking awesome for heavy hip-hop. For info on how to load samples into ReDrum, check out my tutorial on putting samples into Reason. And for info on how to open my sample packs, check out my tutorial on opening a .rar file. Now, let's take a look at those samples. We've got 3 kicks, this kind of low-end kick, one with a lot of high-end click, and that has a bass drop underneath this kind of tambourine sample. And we've got a nice clap snare there, and a nice punchy snare there. And ignore that hi-hat. I don't know how to get rid of them. If someone can tell me, that'd be really useful. Anyway, let's start by linking some of those samples together. Hit the Tab key, and then drag the gate out from channel 1 into the gate in from channel 2. Now if we go back to the front and click the play button, both samples are being triggered at the same time. Really, really useful. Saves you having to program both channels individually. So let's do the same thing for channels 4 and 5 and get those snares linked up as well. Ace. Now let's get making that beat. Select channel 1 and program in your kick drum. So for bouncy hip-hop, you get a really cool rhythm if you place kicks on the beats just before the snares, which will be in the 5 and 13. So I'm going to put one on the 1 just to start it off, and then the 4, which is just before the snare that will come on the 5 there. And also I'm going to put ones on the 10, 11 and 12. Also a cool technique, for these 3 snares, it'll sound quite rigid if I do this, like if I play it dun dun dun, that's quite rigid. So if I change the dynamic slider to soft, and change 11, and click 11 rather, that'll change it to the soft dynamic mode, which makes it a little quieter, if you have a listen to that. It makes it hit more softly, giving the beat more dynamics and making it sound more interesting and, dare I say it, natural. Now, I want the loop to be twice this length, so increase the number of steps to 32. I'm programming the beats for the second half by dragging the Edit Steps slider up to 17 to 32, and then program in as you want. Now we've got our kick loop, so right-click, and click Copy Pattern to Track near the bottom there. And if we look in the sequencer here, we can see that our kick drum pattern has been copied to the track. So if we name that Note Lane Kick, and now right-click and click New Note Lane. And if we name that one Snare, we'll make our snares. Make sure it's selected so when we copy the pattern to the track, that's the note lane it copies to. So back in ReDrum, select Pattern 2, and select the snare, make sure you've got the one that's triggering both samples, and let's place that. I'm going to put it on the 5 and 13 for both of them. and for both halves of the pattern, that is. And in the second half, I'm also going to put it on the 16 there, just so it has this kind of bouncy drop into the repetition of the loop. Now, right-click and copy the pattern to the track again. And there it is in the snare track. And we want one last note lane, which we're going to call bass drop. Make sure it's selected, and go back into ReDrum. Select pattern 3, select the bass drop, and I'm going to put it on the 1 and 7 for both of these halves of the pattern. And if we listen to that, it'll just be like... Yeah, really, really gangster and hip-hop. I've put this one on the 1 and 7 because that's where the notes for my bass line will be triggering. It's a good idea to use percussion to emphasize a bass line, since that makes the low end of the mix really tight. Now right-click and copy the pattern to the track. And since that's the last pattern we've made, we want to disable the pattern section here. So just click again on the Enable Pattern section, and that'll disable it. Now if we take a look here, we've got our loop. So if we click Loop On and take a listen, we've got a pretty cool hip-hop beat there. The next thing we're going to do is to make it bouncier. At the moment, it's kind of rigid. Now, we could use the shuffle button in the ReDrum instance when we made the samples, before we copied them to the track. But to get much more control, Reason's got this really useful thing called a ReGroove mixer here. So if we click that, it opens up these channels here, and you can make several different types of shuffle. So, click the Browse Groove Patch button, and in the ReGroove Patches folder, I'm going to use the MPC one, because I own an MPC and it makes me feel like a real hip-hop producer. I heard somewhere that Dr. Dre has 10 gold MPCs, well, just so he doesn't have to bother loading up new samples. See, that's pretty gangster. While we don't have 10 gold MPCs, or a world-famous white rapper under our belts, it's up to you whether you take that statement literally or figuratively, we do have the shuffle that will do just fine for adding some bouncy swing to our beats. So there it is. I'm going for the 63% shuffle, which I feel is just bouncy enough without making it feel too offbeat. Anything above about 70% starts going into trip-hop territory. Now, once you've selected it on the A1 channel, here in the sequencer, there's this dash with a drop-down menu. Click the drop-down for Select Groove and select A1. And do that for the other two as well. Now, if we take a listen to that, definitely got a lot bouncier, much less rigid, and much more lowrider friendly. Okay, so now we've got the beat programmed, let's make it a bit more professional and punchy. Don't forget to rate this video, then join me in part 2 where we'll add in some EQ, tape compression, and limiting.